along his property boundary. 200 warriors maintained absolute stillness, the dawn's rays illuminating their war-painted features. None of them moved. None uttered a word. They simply observed Malachi Brooks as he clenched his coffee mug with trembling fingers through the glass in his cabin. He had been a nobody the day before, a novice rancher who had never experienced a woman's kiss nor understood the indigenous people's customs in these vast grasslands. Now he found himself at the heart of circumstances beyond his understanding, circumstances that had originated with merely his coat and a woman's thankful expression. Without warning, the tempest had descended the prior evening, blackening the heavens like tar and driving rain across his remote homestead. While inspecting his horses in the modest enclosure, Malachi had noticed her, a shape staggering through the deluge, her ebony hair clinging to her back, her leather dress thoroughly drenched. Her movement suggested someone battling more than mere weather, each footstep purposeful yet weary. He simply acted on instinct at the time, giving it no thought. "Miss, you require protection from the storm," he had called, rushing toward her through the mire. Despite the rain, he could see that her obsidian eyes were filled with what appeared to be terror, not of him, but of something entirely different, something that caused her to keep turning back to face the forest's edge. "I am unable to remain," she had said, her words nearly inaudible over the thunder's roar. Every syllable of her pronunciation was carefully chosen, even though it was soft and foreign. "My tribe will be concerned." However, as lightning cracked the sky and revealed her trembling figure, Malachi acted as his deceased mother had instructed him. He extended kindness to a needy stranger. Without pause, he removed his heavy woolen coat, the garment his father had worn through bitter winters, and placed it over her shoulders. The instant the jacket settled around her, her expression transformed. She looked down at the weathered leather and worn fabric as if they were made of precious metal. And then she looked back at his face with such intensity that his pulse began to flutter in unexpected ways. "You would offer this to me," she had whispered. He had replied, "Only until the weather clears," as he felt warmth rise to his neck. "You are trembling." They had stood there for a brief moment in the pouring rain after she had wrapped the coat around herself. Two strangers sharing something that seemed to be more than just a gesture. Then she had smiled, not the courteous smile of appreciation he had anticipated, but something profound, something that seemed to touch parts of his spirit he hadn't known existed. "My name is Ayanna," she had said. "Malcolm Brooks, I shall not forget this compassion. Malachi Brooks." She had vanished into the darkness before he could invite her into his cabin, leaving him alone in the storm with unanswerable questions. He had no means of knowing that his simple act of mercy had just initiated events that would alter not only his existence, but the fragile equilibrium between two worlds. Now, as he gazed at the silent army beyond his fence, one thought resonated through his consciousness. What precisely had he accomplished? Even though the sun rose higher, the warriors remained stationary. For 3 hours now, Malachi had observed them, his morning meal cooling on the table, his thoughts racing through every conceivable explanation for their presence. Despite the fact that their overwhelming number chilled his blood, they did not directly threaten him. If they chose, 200 men could take over his small homestead in a matter of minutes. He attempted to continue his dawn routine, feeding the poultry and examining the water container, but every action felt observed, scrutinized, evaluated. The warriors' painted faces followed his every movement, their expressions impossible to read. Some bore bows, others gripped lengthy spears, yet none had readied their weapons. They simply remained there like breathing sculptures, forming a human barrier that extended along his entire property's perimeter. As morning progressed, Malachi observed something that tightened his stomach with dread. Additional warriors were approaching. Small bands emerged from the far hills, their mounts moving at a consistent pace toward his ranch. By noon, what had begun as 200 had expanded to nearly 300. They positioned themselves with military exactness, occupying every space along his fence until no gap remained in their formation. That was when he understood this wasn't coincidental. His land had not been the target of a hunting party when this occurred. This was organized, calculated, intentional. But for what purpose? The memory of Ayanna's appreciative smile haunted him. the way she had regarded his jacket as though it signified something far beyond its practical warmth, the deliberate way she had spoken his name, pronouncing each syllable as though it held importance, the intensity in her dark eyes when she had promised to remember his kindness. His father had cautioned him about the complexities of dealing with the native tribes, but those warnings had always seemed distant and abstract. Now, facing hundreds of armed warriors at his doorstep, Malachi wished he had listened more carefully to those lessons. Around midday, movement caught his attention. One warrior, taller than the others and sporting an elaborate headdress made of feathers, got off his horse and started walking toward the cabin. This man's face lacked war paint, unlike the others. His expression was grave but not antagonistic, and he moved with the assured gait of someone accustomed to authority. Malachi's hand instinctively reached for the rifle hanging above his fireplace, then hesitated. 300 warriors against one inexperienced rancher. The weapon would prove useless except to guarantee his own demise. The leader halted exactly 10 paces from Malachi's front steps and spoke in clear, unaccented English. Malachi Brooks. It wasn't a question. The man knew his identity. "Yes, sir," Malachi responded, stepping onto his porch despite his trembling knees. "I am Takakota, chief of the Lakota band that travels these territories. We have come regarding the woman." Malachi's heart pounded against his ribs. "What woman?" Takakota's eyes narrowed slightly, studying Malachi's face with the intensity of a man reading tracks in challenging terrain. "The woman you gave shelter during the storm. The woman who now bears your jacket." The simple words struck Malachi like physical impacts. Ayanna was still wearing his jacket. But why would that concern an entire tribe? She was cold. Malachi said weakly, "I was just trying to help." Something flickered across Takakota's weathered features, an expression Malachi couldn't interpret. When the chief spoke again, his voice carried a gravity that made the atmosphere feel heavier. "Young rancher, are you aware of her identity?" The question lingered in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Malachi looked at Takakota's tired face intently, trying to figure out what was going on. The silence extended between them while 300 warriors awaited his response to a question he didn't comprehend. Malachi responded in a tone that was lower than he intended. "She stated her name was Ayanna. That's my only knowledge." Takakota's expression grew darker. "That is insufficient knowledge." The chief turned and gestured toward the assembled warriors. Without hesitation, each of these men would give their lives for her. They have traveled for 2 days continuously, abandoning their families, because word reached us that she had been observed with a white rancher wearing his coat. Malachi felt the blood leave his face. "I don't comprehend." "It was merely a jacket," Malachi said. "Merely a jacket," Takakota repeated, and something in his tone made Malachi's skin crawl. "Tell me, young rancher, how did she respond to the offer you made?" The memory returned with uncomfortable vividness. The way Ayanna had stared at the jacket as though it were precious, the way she had asked if he would truly give it to her, the intensity in her eyes when she had wrapped it around her shoulders. "She appeared surprised," Malachi admitted, as though she wasn't accustomed to kindness from strangers. Takakota nodded slowly. "She is my daughter." The words hit Malachi like a physical strike. The chief's daughter. He had given his jacket to the chief's daughter. No wonder 300 warriors had appeared at his fence. "Sir, I intended no disrespect," Malachi stammered. "I was merely attempting to assist. I had no idea who she was." "That much is evident," Takakota replied. "If you had known, you would never have dared approach her." Malachi's mind raced. Was this about honor? Had he somehow violated their customs by speaking to her, by touching her with his jacket? The possibilities terrified him. "What happens now?" he asked. Takakota studied him for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to measure Malachi's soul. "That depends on many factors. Why was she alone in the storm? Why did she accept your jacket? And most importantly," the chief's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, "why did she not return home last night?" The final question struck Malachi like cold water. "What do you mean when you say she didn't come home?" "Ayanna departed our camp 2 days ago to collect herbs for her grandmother's medicine. She should have returned before the storm." When our scouts discovered her horse this morning, still wearing your jacket, she was nowhere to be located. Malachi's legs nearly buckled. You believe something happened to her? I believe, Takakota said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, that the last person to see my daughter alive was you. The accusation was like a sword between them. Malachi could feel the gazes of 300 warriors piercing him, their earlier stillness now feeling less like patience and more like the calm preceding violence. She departed on her own. Malachi protested. I offered her my cabin, but she said her people would worry. She wore your jacket as she returned to the storm. Malachi said, yes, but I told her she could keep it until, as he realized what Takakota was really telling him. Ayana had not returned home. She had disappeared somewhere between his ranch and her camp, and he was the last person who had seen her. But there was something else in the chief's eyes, something beyond anger or grief, something that looked almost like hope. There is one way to prove your innocence, young rancher. Takakota's words sent ice through Malachi's veins. Prove his innocence. The way the chief said it suggested the proof will be neither simple nor safe. What kind of evidence? Malachi asked, dreading the response in part. You will assist us in finding her. The statement was so unexpected that Malachi blinked in confusion. Help you find her? However, I have no knowledge of tracking or, you know where you last saw her. You know which direction she went. Most importantly, Takakota's eyes hardened, you know why she was fleeing. Fleeing? The word escaped Malachi's lips before he could stop it. Takakota stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a shadow over Malachi despite the noon sun. My daughter is the finest rider in our tribe. Her horse does not spook easily, and she knows these lands better than the wolves that hunt them. For her to be caught in that storm alone, and on foot, means something drove her from her horse before she reached safety. A chill ran down Malachi's spine as he remembered Ayana's behavior during the storm. The way she kept glancing over her shoulder toward the tree-lean, the fear in her eyes that hadn't seemed directed at him, the exhaustion in her movements as if she'd been traveling hard for hours. She seemed frightened, Malachi admitted, but not of me. She kept looking behind her toward the woods. Exactly. Takakota's voice carried grim satisfaction. Someone was pursuing her, someone who means her harm, and now she has disappeared between your ranch and our camp, somewhere in those 12 miles of wilderness. The mathematics was brutal in its simplicity. 12 miles of rough terrain, countless hiding spots, and a woman who had vanished without a trace. If she was injured or trapped somewhere, every hour that passed reduced her chances of finding her alive. But why do you need me? Malachi asked. You have 300 men who know this land better than I ever will. Because, Takakota said, whoever took my daughter knows we would search. They will avoid the obvious paths, the places we would look first. But they might not expect a white rancher to be hunting with us. Your presence changes their calculations. Malachi felt the weight of 300 stares pressing down on him. Although the reasoning was sound, it meant riding into unidentified danger with men who might still conclude that he was to blame for their chief's daughter's disappearance. And what if we can't locate her? He asked. Takakota's expression grew stone cold. Then you'll discover why my people have survived on these plains for 1,000 years, while others have not. The threat was clear, but something else worried Malachi more. The way Takakota kept referring to someone taking Ayana, as if her disappearance wasn't random, as if the chief knew more about the danger his daughter faced than he was revealing. Who might wish to harm her? Malachi pressed. For the first time, Takakota hesitated. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested old wounds and complicated histories. There are men who believe taking a chief's daughter would give them power over our tribe. Men who think one woman's suffering is worth the chaos it would bring to our people. Other tribes. Worse, Takakota said grimly. Men from our own band who hunger for leadership they have not earned. The revelation hit Malachi like a physical blow. This wasn't about strangers or outside enemies. This was about betrayal from within, Ayana's own people. How do you know? Malachi asked. Takakota's jaw tightened. Because yesterday, before she left camp, 3 young warriors asked permission to court my daughter. I denied them all. The pieces of a darker puzzle began falling into place in Malachi's mind. 3 rejected suitors. A chief's daughter who fled into a storm rather than face whatever was pursuing her. Warriors who might believe that possessing Ayana could somehow transfer Takakota's authority to them. Which 3 men? Malachi asked. Takakota's expression grew even more grim. That is why we need you, White Rancher. I cannot accuse my own warriors without proof. But if one of them has taken Ayana, they will not expect me to ride with a stranger. Your presence will make them careless. The strategy was cunning and dangerous. Use Malachi as an unwitting decoy to flush out potential traitors among Takakota's own men. If the chief was right, one or more of the assembled warriors outside Malachi's fence was complicit in Ayana's disappearance. What if you're wrong? Malachi asked. What if it wasn't someone from your tribe? Then we follow the other trail. What other trail? Takakota pointed toward the distant mountains. 2 days ago, army scouts were seen near our territory. White soldiers looking for something they claimed to have lost. They asked many questions about young native women. The water in Malachi's blood became ice. Army scouts hunting for native women could only mean one thing, and it wasn't anything good. Stories of soldiers taking native women as slaves, or worse, had reached even his isolated ranch. You think the army took her? I think, Takakota said carefully, that someone wanted us to believe the army took her. But my daughter is too smart and too fast to be caught by clumsy horse soldiers. She would only be taken by someone she trusted. The implication hung between them like a noose. Someone Ayana trusted had betrayed her. Someone close enough to get near her without raising suspicion. Someone who knew her habits, her routes, her weaknesses. How can I help track someone through country I don't know? Malachi inquired. You cannot, but you can watch faces while I track. You can see which of my men seem nervous when we search certain areas. As their chief, I might miss things that an outsider would notice. You can see them. It was a dangerous game Takakota was proposing. Malachi would ride into hostile territory with men who might be enemies, looking for clues to find traitors among warriors who could kill him before he could even scream. The alternative, on the other hand, was to watch as Ayana went missing and possibly perish in the wilderness as precious time passed. If we find who took her, Malachi asked, what happens then? Takakota's smile was sharp as a blade. Justice. The single word carried more menace than any threat Malachi had ever heard. Whatever justice meant to a Lakota chief, it wouldn't be gentle. When do we leave? Now. Malachi found himself asking. Every time we delay, they have more time to hide her or, Takakota said with a slight pause, to make sure she never speaks of what she has seen. The urgency in the chief's tone told Malachi everything he needed to know about Ayana's chances if they didn't find her soon. This wasn't just about a missing woman anymore. This was about preventing a murder. I'll get my horse, Malachi said, turning toward the stable. Takakota's voice stopped him cold. Bring your rifle, White Rancher, and pray to whatever God you believe in that we find my daughter before nightfall. The chief's words carried a finality that made Malachi's hands shake as he reached for his saddle. Whatever they were riding into, Takakota clearly expected it to end in blood. But as Malachi prepared his horse, one thought kept echoing in his mind. If Ayana had been taken by someone she trusted, someone from her own tribe, then riding out with Takakota's warriors might not be a rescue mission. It might be riding straight into a trap. Malachi was riding with Takakota at the head of a column of 50 warriors in a matter of minutes. The remaining men stayed behind to guard the ranch and watch the surrounding area, but their presence felt more like insurance and protection. Insurance that Malachi wouldn't try to escape if things went badly. The trail started exactly where Malachi remembered seeing Ayana disappear into the storm. Takakota dismounted and studied the ground with the intensity of a man reading a book written in mud and broken grass. Despite the previous night's rain, he seemed to find signs that Malachi's untrained eyes couldn't detect. She went this way, Takakota announced, pointing toward a rocky outcropping about half a mile from Malachi's fence line. But she was not alone. How can you tell? Her footprints are shallow on the right side and deep on the left. Probably hurt. she was favoring her left leg. And here, Takakota said, someone else's boots, pointing to a depression in the soft earth. Larger, walking behind her. The image that formed in Malachi's mind made his stomach clench. Ayana, hurt and limping, being followed by someone who meant her harm. No wonder she had seemed so frightened during the storm. As they followed the trail deeper into the wilderness, Malachi became aware of tension among the warriors riding with them. Conversations died when he looked in their direction. Several men kept glancing at each other with expressions he couldn't read. The atmosphere felt charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Tell me about the 3 men who asked to court your daughter, Malachi said quietly to Takakota. The chief's jaw tightened. Kitsuchi rides with us today. He is young, impetuous, believes his hunting skills make him worthy of any woman. Ayana has made it abundantly clear that she has no desire for him. Malachi scanned the warriors behind them, but couldn't identify which man might be Kitsuchi. They all looked formidable and dangerous to his inexperienced eyes. The second is Chatan. He is older and smarter. He believes marriage to my daughter would give him claim to lead the tribe when I die. Is he here too? He stayed behind to guard your ranch. Takakota's tone suggested that decision had been deliberate. The third is Maddox. He has a violent temper and does not accept rejection well. Before Malachi could ask about Maddox, Takakota suddenly raised his hand, signaling the entire column to halt. The chief dismounted again and examined something on the ground that made his expression darken considerably. What is it? Malachi inquired. Blood. The single word sent ice through Malachi's veins. He could barely make out dark stains on the rocks as he looked down at Takakota's study area. How much blood? Malachi asked, dreading the answer. Insufficient to kill, but sufficient to weaken. Takakota stood slowly, his eyes scanning the surrounding terrain. The trail splits here. Malachi saw it now. What had been a clear path through the grass suddenly diverged in 3 different directions. One set of tracks led toward the river, another toward the mountains, and a third back toward the area near his ranch. Which way do we go? Malachi inquired. Before Takakota could answer, one of the warriors behind them spoke up. Chief, we should split our forces. Cover all 3 trails. Malachi turned to see a young man with intricate tattoos covering his arms. The warrior's suggestion sounded logical, but something in his tone made Malachi uneasy. That is Kitsuchi, Takakota murmured, confirming Malachi's suspicion. It would be faster to search all 3 paths, Kitsuchi continued. We need to find her quickly if she is injured and hiding. Other warriors murmured agreement. But Takakota remained silent for a long moment, studying the split trails with an expression that suggested he was seeing more than just footprints and broken grass. The chief finally responded, No, we stay together. But chief, another warrior protested. If we split up, Takakota interrupted, his voice carrying deadly authority, whoever took my daughter will have accomplished exactly what they intended. They want us scattered, confused, chasing shadows while they escape with their prize. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Takakota was all but declaring that one of his own men was responsible for Ayana's disappearance, and that the split trail was a deliberate deception. Malachi watched the faces of the warriors around him, looking for the tells Takakota had described. He saw something that chilled his blood. More than one man looked nervous. However, it wasn't the anxiety over their chief's daughter. Men whose plans had just been exposed were trembling. Takakota's decision to keep the group together created an immediate shift in atmosphere. Malachi could see several warriors exchanging glances that spoke of plans disrupted and timelines thrown into chaos. The chief had essentially declared that he didn't trust his own men, and everyone knew it. We follow the trail toward the river, Takakota announced. That path shows the most weight in the tracks. Someone wanted us to think she went toward the mountains or back to the ranch, but the river trail tells a real story. As they rode toward the water, Malachi found himself studying each warrior with new eyes. Kitsuchi rode near the front, his jaw clenched in what looked like frustration. Behind him, other men whispered among themselves in their native language, their tones urgent and worried. The river, when they reached it, was running high from the previous night storm. The banks were muddy and torn up, making tracking difficult. Takakota dismounted again and spent long minutes examining the ground, his expression growing increasingly grim. "She crossed here," he finally announced, "but not willingly." "How do you know?" "The distance between her steps. Someone was forcing her to move faster than her injury allowed." Takakota's voice carried a rage that made the air feel dangerous. "And there are horse tracks on the other side. Fresh ones." The implication was clear. Whoever had taken Ayana had horses waiting across the river. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or passion. It was planned, organized, coordinated. From upstream, Kichichi yelled, "Chief, I found something." Everyone rode toward the young warrior, who was pointing at something caught on a low-hanging branch near the water's edge. Even from a distance, Malachi could see what it was. His blazer, the wool coat that he provided to Ayana during the storm. Takakota said quietly, "She left it as a sign. My daughter is clever. She wanted us to know this was the right path." But as they got closer, Malachi noticed something that made his heart sink. The jacket wasn't just caught on the branch. It was tied there, deliberately placed where searchers would find it. And there was something else. "There's a message," Malachi said, pointing to a piece of bark tucked into one of the jacket's pockets. Takakota pulled out the bark carefully. Scratched into its surface in what looked like charcoal were symbols Malachi couldn't read, but their meaning seemed to hit Takakota like a physical blow. "What does it say?" Malachi inquired. Takakota's face had gone pale beneath his weathered skin. "It says, 'The daughter pays the father's crimes. Sunset tomorrow or she dies.'" The message changed everything. This wasn't about rejected suitors or ambitious warriors seeking power through marriage. This was about revenge against Takakota himself, with Ayana as the weapon. "What crimes?" Malachi inquired. "In the winter, there was a disagreement. A warrior from another band claimed I had stolen horses that belonged to his family. When he challenged me to combat, I defeated him, but I spared his life." Takakota's voice carried the weight of regret. His name was Akachita. He swore he would have his revenge. "You think he took Ayana?" "I believe he has assistants." Takakota looked around at his assembled warriors with eyes that held both fury and suspicion. "Someone told him when my daughter would be traveling alone. Someone gave him information about her routes, her habits." The accusation hung over the group like a storm cloud. Their chief's daughter had been betrayed by one of the warriors riding with them. The question was, which one? Malachi watched faces again, looking for the tells of guilt or fear. He saw something far worse instead. Several of the warriors were looking at each other with expressions of recognition, as if they were silently acknowledging something they all knew but hadn't spoken aloud. "There's something else," Malachi said quietly to Takakota. "That message. It gives you until sunset tomorrow. That's more than 24 hours away. Why so long?" Takakota's eyes narrowed as he considered the question. Because Akachita is not just seeking revenge. He wants to be humiliated. He wants time for word to spread. He would like other tribes to be aware that the great chief Takakota was unable to safeguard his own daughter. Or, Malachi suggested, fearing the worst, he wants time for you to make a mistake. Time for you to do something desperate that will destroy your authority with your own people. The truth of it hit them both simultaneously. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a trap designed to force Takakota into actions that would discredit him as a leader. If he negotiated with Akachita, he would look weak. If he refused and let Ayana die, he would look heartless. If he attacked and lost warriors in the process, he would look reckless. What does Akachita want in return for her release? Malachi inquired. Takakota's smile was sharp and cold. He has not said yet, but I know what he wants. He wants me to abdicate my position as chief and acknowledge him as the rightful leader of both our bands. The conspiracy scope was becoming increasingly apparent. This wasn't just about one man's revenge. This was about a coup designed to topple Takakota from power and unite two tribes under Akachita's leadership. But as Malachi processed this revelation, another thought struck him with chilling clarity. If Akachita needed inside information to plan Ayana's capture, and if several warriors in their group seemed to know more than they were saying, then their rescue mission might actually be leading them straight into an ambush. Within an hour, Malachi's warning about the ambush proved to be accurate. As they followed the trail deeper into a narrow canyon, arrows suddenly whistled from the rocks above, and hostile war cries echoed off the stone walls. Malachi spotted something that made his blood freeze before Takakota's warriors fled for cover. Kitchi was not hiding with the other people. Instead, the young warrior was clearly using pre-planned hand gestures to communicate with the attackers. The betrayal Takakota had suspected was happening right in front of them. Takakota, over the sound of arrows hitting stone, Malachi yelled, "Kitchi is with them." The chief's eyes followed Malachi's pointing finger, and his face hardened into a mass of controlled fury. In one fluid motion, Takakota drew his bow and put an arrow through Kitchi's shoulder, dropping the traitor to the canyon floor. When Takakota's faithful warriors realized that one of their own had led them into a trap, the ambush broke down in chaos. But the distraction gave Malachi a chance to spot something the others had missed. High up on the canyon wall, partially hidden behind a cluster of boulders, he could see a flash of buckskin that could only be Ayana. "She's up there," Malachi called to Takakota, pointing toward the rocky outcropping, about 50 yards up the north wall. "Too exposed," Takakota replied, firing an arrow at one of Akachita's men. "They will kill her before we can reach her." But Malachi was already moving. He deviated from the main group and began climbing the steep rock face while the warriors engaged the ambushers on the canyon floor. Desperation gave him strength he didn't know he had because his easy ranch life hadn't prepared him for this kind of effort. While the battle was raging below, the ascent took hours and minutes. When he finally reached the ledge where he had spotted Ayana, he found her bound and gagged, but alive and conscious. When she saw him, her eyes widened and then filled with relief. "It's going to be all right," he whispered as he cut through her bonds with his knife. "Your father is here." "Malachi," she gasped as soon as he removed the gag. It was Kitchi. He advised Akachita where to locate me. "I know. Your father figured it out." Malachi, on the other hand, could tell that they weren't safe yet as he helped her stand. The ledge they were on was a dead end, with sheer drops on 3 sides. The only way down was a treacherous path he had just climbed, and that would leave them exposed to enemy arrows. That was when Ayana surprised him. Instead of being the helpless captive he expected, she proved to be as resourceful as her father had claimed. She knew a different route down, a hidden path that would bring them out behind Akachita's position. "Follow me," she said, moving with confidence despite her ordeal. "And stay low." The descent was even more dangerous than the climb up, but Ayana moved like someone who had spent her entire life navigating difficult terrain. When they finally reached the canyon floor, they were positioned perfectly to see Akachita, directing his warriors from a protected position behind a large boulder. "Can you use that rifle?" Ayana asked, pointing to the weapon still strapped across Malachi's back. "Not well," he admitted. "Then give it to me." What happened next would stay with Malachi for the rest of his life. Ayana took his rifle, settled into a shooting position with practiced ease, and put a bullet through Akachita's thigh, dropping him instantly. The shot was so precise, so unexpected from their position, that it created exactly the confusion Takakota needed to rally his warriors and overwhelm the remaining ambushers. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. Akachita's surviving men surrendered when they realized their leader was wounded and their advantage was gone. Kitchi, bleeding but alive, was taken prisoner along with 2 other warriors who had been part of conspiracy. As the dust settled and the immediate danger passed, Malachi found himself standing with Ayana at the center of a group of victorious warriors, all of them looking at him with expressions of newfound respect. "You climbed the canyon wall to save my daughter," Takakota said, approaching them with something that might have been pride in his voice. "That took courage I did not know you possessed." Malachi looked down at his torn clothes and scraped hands, amazed at what desperation and determination had driven him to do. 3 days ago, he had been a lonely rancher who had never kissed a woman or fired a shot in anger. Now he had helped rescue a chief's daughter and expose conspiracy that could have destroyed an entire tribe. "Your jacket," Ayana said softly, holding out the wool coat he had given her during the storm. You should have this back. Keep it, Malachi replied. Something tells me you've earned it. She smiled then, the same deep smile she had given him during the storm. Malachi also noticed a change in himself. He was no longer the inexperienced boy who had started this adventure. He was a man who had faced danger and proven himself capable of courage when it mattered most. You will always be welcome in our camp, Malachi Brooks, Takakota said officially. Any man brave enough to risk his life for my daughter has earned a place among our warriors. As they rode back toward his ranch with Ayana safe and the traders in custody, Malachi realized that giving away a simple jacket during a storm had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. He was no longer alone on his isolated homestead. He had found something worth fighting for, and people who considered him family. The sun was setting as they reached his fence line, painting the sky in shades of gold and red.